the way I approach landscape, which is important for each theory, I immersed in it. And so I pretended for generally a full day, sometimes two, but often one, that was my theory. And I put my life and soul into each theory and made it as if it were mine. I wanted to present it. I had a word limit. I had, like a minimum of for the major theories, 500 words, maximum maybe 1,200 words. So I wasn't going to go on and on. So I had to get it into that space, and I embraced it. I became, like a method actor into that one theory, so that was all I cared about for that one night.
Robert, first of all, thank you so much for joining me. This is
It's
a
a pleasure. You've doing a great job to promote our mind body problem in all spheres. So that is great.
I wore my polo neck today just to pay homage to the legendary Robert Lawrence Kuhn. How are you?
Well, it's good. It's great to meet, and look forward to our conversation for sure.
I cannot wait. This has been a long time coming. For me, I've been a fan watching your show for so many years. There would be no mind body solution without Closer to Truth. So thank you so much from my side for
Well,
inspiring and making it what
that,
it is.
that's terrific. I wish I had eleemosynary motives for doing Closer to Truth, but it's really comes out of a deep personal passion. When it first started, which first conversation was probably 27 years ago with a station manager of a PBS station that was one of the smallest in the country, and he was willing to take a chance on, at that point, a pretty unknown person in the media world for sure. And he said, I don't know what time we can be on. And, from my point of view, if we be on at 3:30 in the morning on one station, that was just fine. I mean, I was just thrilled to be able to have the opportunity. So it's Closer to Truth has been a great adventure. It's gone through several incarnations since started. First filming was in abortive filming was in 1996, and then a real test in 1998, and then we filmed in 1999 a series of 28 television shows and some really quite interesting. It was a panel discussion originally, and we had one show with John Searle and Dave Chalmers in 1999. And we were able to take advantage of that on a Closer to Truth show later on, where we had each of them together in 1999, then separately in 2007, separately in 2014. So we did a little tracing of a longitudinal study with two of our most favored mind-body problem philosophers. And then in 2008, we began a new series. Peter Getzel's, who's a terrific science producer director, joined me and really we recreated the show, and he was co-creator and producer director. We did On Location, and that's what we've seen, and it's been on steady since 2008. And it's just been a wonderful adventure. As you know, consciousness, mind body problems, my original field in neurophysiology. And I returned to it with Closer to Truth. I didn't realize how much consciousness would consume me in the last year or two, but I follow the capriciousness of the world.
It's such an incredible story because I remember being a kid wanting to explore this field, and I watched your show. And the first thing I thought was, this is exactly what I want to do one day. This is the type of show I want to host. This is the type of content I want people to see. And it brings me to the premise of this conversation, which is your infamous paper. This has been such a landmark paper. It reminds me of David Chalmers' 1994. I mean, The Hard Problem. You've put out a landscape of consciousness. It's similar to something I've been trying to do with this channel. Mind Body Solution has been an approach to try and explicate all these implications, explanations of consciousness, and you've developed a taxonomy that I think as going to live on, and you will be remembered as someone who's brought all of these diverse fields together. Tell me, Robert, let's start with the landscape. What inspired this? Why did you do it? And then we can move on from there.
Great. Well, it's the simplest answer when all fails is to tell the truth in its complexity. As you said, you and I are very similar. I was consumed by the mind-body problem as a teenager, a young teenager. I was interested in all facets of it, certainly the science, but also, frankly, parapsychology at that point as a teenager. And I was actually when I was an undergraduate, I wrote and had a very fine conversation through letter at that point with J.B. Ryan at Duke, and he invited me to do my PhD with him, and I almost did that, but then decided, no, I think I really want to do hard science, and then I went to UCLA Brain Research Institute for a PhD in neurophysiology. It happened to be in the Department of Anatomy in the Brain Research Institute because that's where all the great neurophysiologists were at the time. Um, but so since then, and since I was a late teen and early 20s, I had a passion for the understanding all aspects of the mind-body problem. Then the exigencies of life, young family. I got married very young, had three kids by the time I was, I think, 24 or 25. And so that led to lots of other things that I did in the business world and investment banking, various things. But I always followed mind brain, and always had and from the probably middle 1980s, I had the vision that when I was going to retire from my business world, I would I would do something like Closer to Truth. That was not the name originally. Originally, the name that I thought was When Truth May Change, because I wanted to look for those aspects of deep fundamental questions where there was a challenge to the conventional wisdom. Didn't mean it was right, but it was an intelligent challenge. So that transformed later on, and then by the middle 90s, I realized that I was never going to retire. And so that if I wanted to do what became Closer to Truth, I'd better do it now, as difficult as it would be with all the other things I was doing. And that became its own story and developed over the years. And it was just totally fulfilling. And then after I was able to sell a business that I had helped create as a co-partner and had some independent flexibility, I really began focusing on Closer to Truth just as a pure passion, and was pleased and surprised that stations carried it. Sometimes it was a non-prime time, but that was okay with me, and got up to 200 stations, which we continued to be for 2 decades, and just continued then with the web and the growth of online. And I always had in my mind that I wanted to put down on paper an analysis of consciousness. I've read all the papers as you have over the years, and I just felt I had a sense of wanting to do that, but I never thought I would, because it would be a significant task, and I was totally occupied with everything I was doing anyway. And then in late 2022, it was in November, I think, I was asked by one Closer to Truth watcher or fan like you are, who happened to be on the board of a journal, very good journal called Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology. The main editor is Dennis Noble, who independently and quite coincidentally I later interviewed for a series on philosophy of biology. And he said they were going to do a special issue on consciousness, obviously from the biophysical, molecular biology, and particularly from a quantum biological context. And they were thinking about that, and he asked me, because he'd been watching Closer to Truth and engaged with it, would I write the initial paper as sort of an overview of the field to introduce their special issue. And I knew when he said that, that it resonated with something I had thought I wanted to do but never would. And this was sort of a push, an excuse or not an excuse. It was it was sort of the opportunity that I wanted, and now it sort of scared me because now I have to decide, do I want to do this or not? Here's an invitation to do it. I can say no. In fact, I think originally I did say no because I just couldn't have the time. And then I thought that I wanted to do this, and here's a venue to do it, and maybe I should, because if I don't do it now, I probably never will do it.
Mm.
And so I knew the work would be significant, but to jump ahead, I underestimated the work by about 95%. So I thought it would take about 5%. I went back and looked. I probably have 1,000 different versions of landscape.
Mm.
I'm not saying 1,000 because it was 35, and I'm exaggerating to say 1,000. I mean, you can look in the landscape file. There are like 1,500 documents, because every night I would save it would, and I'd send it to myself on email to protect. So I have a huge amount. So what I estimated that I was scared about was 5% of what it eventually took.
Mm.
And then it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and as I did it, I continued to be dissatisfied with the lack of comprehensiveness. I knew I couldn't get it all, and I knew that a taxonomy is going to be artificial, it's one-dimensional, and it's just a way of thinking, and there's nothing magical about it. But it became, honestly, an obsession and a compulsion.
Mm.
And over the period of writing was about 15 months, but some of that time was for peer review. So it wasn't like a writing, but writing significantly was probably about 9 or 10 months. And when I say significantly, I mean like every night till 4 to 7 in the morning due to other things that I had. So it was a very difficult experience in terms of physicality, but it was absolutely, uh, absolutely electrifying and exciting, and to do it. And once again, I had the attitude towards landscape, as I did for Closer to Truth originally, that if it never got published, and there was a possibility of that, which I can explain later, because of the breadth of what I did, which was more than biophysics and molecular biology. And if it never got published, uh, I wouldn't do it differently. I would do the same thing because I was in this mode of having to do it,
Mm.
and it was just a wonderful life experience for me, and in a sense, an opening and a sense of closure. After my first paper I wrote on any topic, and I've written lots of books and papers on all sorts of things, but the first paper that I wrote that was published anywhere was in 1969. I don't know where you were in 1969, but that was 55 years ago, and that was, the mind-body problem.
Tell me, Robert, when you
So
sorry,
I
continue.
had just one more thing that I had fun. I went back at the very first document that I wrote, and it was like 6,000 words, and it was all a jumble of some ideas I had at different places. And when I looked at that, I did that a few weeks ago. It literally scared me. I physically felt a visceral tightness in my stomach, because I remembered when I wrote that document thinking, yeah, I'm going to do it. Now let me see what what it's going to look like. And at that time, if I had any indication of what it would take, I probably wouldn't have done it. And that's a good metaphor for life, that we don't know. We just take the next step right before us. And I guess that's good.
One of my questions was going to be why you did not publish this as a book, and you've partly answered that, but because this could have easily been a book. This is a book if you take the amount of words. This is a this is a massive paper.
Sure. And that's a very good question. And on the first peer review, which was a very minor percentage of the book. It was about 55 or 60,000 words, so a little more than a third of what it eventually turned out to be. The peer reviewer made that point. He said, "This is," and that was at 55,000 words, much less 175 as it turned out. He said, "This should be a book." That was one point. He also had the point, which was an important turning point. He said, the science I presented at the time, which was again a minority of what eventually turned out, is excellent, terrific. He had a couple of suggestions which were really good. I mean, one thing I had planning to do but not sure, and another that I had missed, and one that was I had rejected, which we can talk about later, which was the importance of language, which I rejected relating to consciousness per se, but he thought it was very important, and so I added that later, and actually believed that was an improvement. But one thing he said, which was quite natural, he said all the science is terrific, and again he made his suggestions. He said, but this hardcore philosophy about pan-proto consciousness or non-reductive physicalism or emergent dualism, whatever this stuff. He says, and certainly all the theology, the different religious and traditional wisdom traditions that deal with consciousness, Hinduism in particular. He said, that's not going to be of interest to the readers of the progress in biophysics and molecular biology. So those were his points. This is the first peer review. And so I wrote back very extensive enough, thanking him for his suggestions, which were very good, and saying two things. One, regarding the philosophy and theology. I said, if I were you, again, it was peer review, anonymous, so I don't know who he is or she, and I thanked them in the acknowledgments because they really made a terrific contribution, but I don't know who they are. But I said, if I were you, I would say exactly the same thing, and I wouldn't allow this in the journal. It doesn't make sense. However, it makes sense for me because I'm going to do this landscape once in my life, and I have to do it the way I think makes sense. So the peer reviewer, asked me to take out the heavy philosophy and all the theology. And I said, if I were you, I would say the same thing. But, I'm going to do this once in my life, and I have to do it to satisfy me. If you don't want to publish it in the Journal of Biophysics and Molecular Biology, Progress, I completely understand, and I agree, and I'll try to find another venue, but I can't publish it without the whole story. And that's part of the point, that I'm presenting the totality of human thinking about the nature of consciousness. And anything I find that I think relevant to that topic is going to be in this paper. And I don't care if anybody ever reads it. I don't care if it's ever published. I mean, I can send it to friends, but I have to do what I do. And to their credit, they agreed, and they said, and made no cuts and no attenuations. Everything was exactly as I wanted to. And I also pay them credit because I made, after the final version was final, which was like in January, I probably had 7 more versions of it, in making small changes because I got a lot of feedback and other things, and they were extremely supportive, and so I give the journal Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology great credit and great appreciation on a really a lifetime basis. As to the question of why it's not a book, because that was the first, as I said, when it was still 30% of what it turned out to be, they said it should be a book. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be like a scientific paper on this topic. That just felt right to me because I didn't want it to be a book at that point, because a book is like too much of a final kind of position, and I was not comfortable with that. I wanted to put it out as a kind of a working paper, and curiously, it turned out through an accident or a misunderstanding to be the case. And let me just take a few minutes to explain, because it's a really important part of the paper. So in one incarnation of the paper, which we agreed was final, which at that point was about 125,000 words, was in December of 2023, last year. And I was still working on some stuff, but I could put that a little bit in later. But I said, this is, where we are. That was a response to the second response to the peer review process, and I'm still working on it. And then suddenly, like 4 days later, I got an email saying this has been accepted and it's been published online. The journal would come, months and months later, but it's been online, and I panicked, because this is not the way I wanted to present landscape. Again, that was 125,000 words compared to 175 in the end. And I really panicked, and because people are not going to read the thing twice at that length. They'll see it once and they'll get a first impression, and then that's it. And I begged them to take it down. Please take it down. And they said, we can't do that. They said, we have a policy that, once you get it up, the only time we take it down if there's fraud, scientific fraud or plagiarism. If we take it down, everybody's going to think you plagiarized it. I said, I don't care. I said, take it down, take it down. And they, after about 3 weeks, they took it down, and they put a note. They're saying, we took it down under unusual circumstances, and we hope to put it back. But if we don't, we'll explain why. It was some mysterious comment like that. And I was really happy. But what happened? What happened then? Which I would never had guessed. I got maybe 15 or 20 emails from people who saw it, the first version, and about 8 or 10 were really good, pointing out things that I had missed, which I would have never thought of. And a few of them were really angry at me for missing it. They were devotees of one particular philosopher or religious tradition, whatever it was. And the fact that I left that out was an anathema. And they really, I mean, it was like, I had insulted their daughter as ugly, or something like that. It was so intense. But I realized that each one, a number of them were really right in terms of this is an area that is thought important by a segment of humanity, not just wasn't an isolated person. One example is Rudolf Steiner, who was, different opinion, but from the Theosophy tradition and very mystical and bizarre ideas. But I got 2 emails from people telling me about these Rudolf Steiner groups that are devoted to his theories on consciousness and all of this. And then I looked at it. I mean, I had heard of it, but wouldn't have even given it a second thought. And I looked at it, and it was original. It was different. It was bizarre. To me, it was absurd. But no matter, I put it in and did it. And the way I approach landscape, which is important for each theory, I immersed in it. And so I pretended for generally a full day, sometimes 2, but often 1, that was my theory. And I put my life and soul into each theory and made it as if it were mine. I wanted to present it. I had a word limit. I had, like a minimum of for the major theories, 400 or 500 words, maximum maybe 1,200 words. So I wasn't going to go on and on. So I had to get it into that space. and I embraced it. I became, like a method actor into that one theory, so that was all I cared about for that one night. And I did that with Rudolf Steiner, and I convinced myself that this was an interesting thing, and put it in. Another one was an Argentine Canadian philosopher, very sophisticated, Mario Bunge, and we can talk about his work. And it was really interesting, and I was reprimanded by a philosopher scientist, a quite legitimate one, for leaving it out. I mean, I think he was South American, and I hadn't mentioned him, but South American. And he's really a substantial individual that has not been given enough credit in terms of the mind-body problem and his contribution to it. And that was absolutely right. And like with Rudolf Steiner, I sort of heard of it, but dismissed it. This one I hadn't even heard of. I mean, because, I don't do this 100% of my time looking at every paper on consciousness. It's just a reflection of what I've done on Closer to Truth and my own readings and following, a whole bunch of science magazines, and it doesn't appear there. But I'm not actively in the field, so I'm not up on everything. And so that experience of the paper being prematurely published turned out to be a wonderful benefit, which is the purpose of scientific preprints, that you publish and you get comments, and you then deal with it, and then you publish the real final paper. The famous philosopher Derek Parfit, in his last work on What Matters, I think had published preprints for 10 years before he published the final paper. So I did that by accident, by misunderstanding of how the process worked, but it turned out to be a real benefit to the paper, and it enabled me to include things that I wouldn't ever. And I give the people who wrote to me, even though they were kind of harsh on my intellectual kind of narrow-mindedness originally, I gave them credit for recommending the additions that they did. So I look at the paper as being sort of a collective a work in process. I say that in the paper, and since the paper was published, I've gotten 80 different theories, and I have literally, and I have a document called Theories After Landscape, and it is about 100 pages now, and there are two or three that probably should be in there in some future version, which we can talk about as well. So for all those reasons, I'm very comfortable with the decision not to be a book, but to be a paper in this sense of a work in process.
I completely understand where you're coming from when you say you spent an entire day trying to become this version, almost creating a virtual reality version of yourself, putting yourself in the shoes of that person, because that's what I try to do every time I interview a guest on this podcast. The guest, if they're an idealist, I try and make sure I come in this as an idealist, try to show the people exactly what this person is trying to say, rather than try and negate everything they're trying to explore, because it's a lot more, I think it's a lot more destructive rather than constructive. And I think that approach is the best way to navigate this fascinating territory. You managed to do this, and you formatted this. I'm going to use Alex's diagram. I mean, you used, number one was materialism, non-reductive physicalism, quantum integrated information, panpsychisms, monisms, dualisms, idealisms, anomalous and altered states, and challenges. And I know at the very end of your paper, I read it twice, by the way. So you said some people don't read it twice. I was one of them, at least. At the very end, you say you find yourself almost merging between a mixture of a dualist idealist. Do you want to quickly explore that before we continue?
Well, let's explore the whole question of what I believe, because many people ask me that. They've always asked me that on Closer to Truth. Let me slightly come at this a little differently than I've said. I immerse in each theory, but when I do Closer to Truth, my object, as your object is to get the very best out of the thinker. And that's a combination of the empathy, but also the critique. So my favorite, as you'd expect, we have tens of thousands of comments that come in to Closer to Truth, mostly on YouTube now. But my favorite is one, and this happened several times, in one set of comments, it might be several hundred, maybe a third of the way down, this was on some theological question. We don't deal with religion as a sociological, but purely ontological, questions about what does it mean if God knows everything, and what's the deep implications of that. Irrespective of whether you believe in God or what's the relationship between God and time. So those are closer to truth kinds of deep topics that probe the nature of what you think of God, the nature of what you think of time. Even if you don't believe in God, it's a very valid philosophical question. And so I deal a third of Closer to Truth is dealing with meaning and philosophy of religion, philosophical theology, critical thinking kinds of questions. One time somebody said that there were too many religious people, and I did a count of the atheists and theists on Closer to Truth. We've had 500 participants over 25 years. Came out pretty balanced. It came out not deliberately, but it was within a statistical error of almost 50-50. But my favorite comments were, one person said, this is a great video. I really learned a lot, but Kuhn is a closet theist. He's trying to convert the non-believers. And then about 30, 40 comments later, I really enjoyed the video, but Kuhn is a closet atheist. He's trying to undermine the true belief of believers like me. And that's my favorite. And to the same video, somebody thought I was a closet atheist, and somebody thought I was a closet theist trying to avert the other. And so that's an accurate statement.
Yes.
When people ask me about Closer to Truth, I say one of my favorite comments is that you can go to theistic websites and atheistic websites about Closer to Truth, and both of them will say this is really good stuff. There is some things on there that you don't want to see that's kind of offbeat, but the core of it is good. So we like that. So I like to do both things. I like to, on Closer to Truth, I like to empathize to get it out, and I like to critique, which gives the impression that I'm on the other side, the atheist or the theist. However, in landscape, I did not do that in the first stage. In landscape, I deliberately did not. I set forth right in the first few paragraphs, I'm not going to do that. I did it in the abstract. They said that there's going to be no critique. Each one is going to be presented as best as I can, using as much as possible the words of the authors themselves, which I'm distilling out of what they have. But there's not going to be, the only time there'll be critique is if it's absolutely needed for clarification. But there won't be any critique of theories, and there won't be any adjudication among the theories and comparison, because this is such a vast field. I want to do one thing. I want to gather the totality of human thinking, the best human thinking, in my opinion, on the nature of consciousness among all humanity. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is I want to try to offer a taxonomy of organization, knowing that is nothing so special about what I'll do. It's just the way I'll think about it, how to present it in a one-dimensional fashion. That's what I'm going to try. So I'm going to try to do the unrealistic thing of getting all the theories that I think exceed a certain threshold of credibility, and in no way will it affect my own personal belief. Am I doing it to skew to my own personal beliefs? I put any personal beliefs I have to the side, and they're irrelevant and meaningless. And so that's the way I wanted that paper. Nonetheless, not everybody, a lot of people ask me, well, what do you really believe? And what do you do? And my first answer is, I'm not going to answer that question, because right now I've immersed in all these theories, and it doesn't matter what I believe or what I believed 50 years ago, what I believed 30 years ago or now. It doesn't matter. This is what I'm doing. I'm getting the best thinking of humanity, and I'm trying my very best to present each one as good as I can possibly do from the own author's perspective, but do it in a way that is coherent. One philosopher, I don't have his permission to give his name, but a well-known philosopher wrote to me, and he's kind of, shall we say, very skeptical kind of guy. And he said, and he wrote, "This is a great paper, but all the theories, all the theories are just stupid or wrong, and don't make any sense." And I said, but he said it's intelligent error. And I wrote back, I said, "Thanks for saying at least it's intelligent." And then he wrote back, he said, "I don't mean you made the error. You did a great job. I mean, you did a super job in presenting what they said. They made all the errors. You did great in presenting." So that was very good. That gave me satisfaction. That's what I want to accomplish in landscape, to take the theories as best as I can and encapsulate it in a sophisticated way. It's not, for lay people. It's for people who really know the field. That's why I wanted it to be a scientific journal article, not a popular book. As a popular book, I was going to have to make all sorts of other kinds of comments, which I do on Closer to Truth, but I didn't want that here. I wanted this to be a rigorous scientific paper and when I say scientific, I mean scientific way of thinking. Not that it's all science, because a lot of it is not science, and that's part of the point in terms of the scientific, experimentation, replication by different forces, etc. A lot of the theories are not amenable to that, but each one is designed to have a scientific way of thinking and presentation. And so, given that, my opinion and what I'm thinking is an anathema to that. It should not be included. And indeed, when I'm doing it, it wasn't included, as I told you, because I was so inhabited in each theory that when I did each theory, by the end of it, I really believed that theory for that one day. Then I forgot about it and went on to the next. So, I mean, if you ask me about some theory now, I'd have to sort of review what I said, because each one is intense for that period of time, and then it's out of your mind to go on to the next. But some people began to think if I don't say something, I have some kind of hidden agenda. And so I was caught between these two things of not wanting to have a personal opinion here, and caught with the other objection, which I hadn't thought of, that people say, if you don't do that, because everybody has an opinion, and if you don't give an opinion, then you're hiding it, and maybe you are a closet atheist or a closet theist or something, and we don't know. And so after and these were responses to the first version, which was published in January of this year, and in what I thought was an error. And so I recognize that I have to say something. So what I said was, I put, out of 175,000 words, 175,000, I have 39 words that explain my view, and then a footnote to that of 33 words. So it's 72 words out of 175,000. You can calculate the percentage that deals with my opinion. And the way I said it is, I explained that it's something like, I guess I have to give you, I don't want to give you my opinion. It's an anathema to this paper, but I think I have to, because, there might be people think a hidden agenda. So I said, if I'm forced to confess it, and for what little it's worth, here's what I believe. And then, I said, kind of a dualist, idealist mashup. And then I had a footnote. And I said, if that's not right, my second was, I think, some quantum theories, which actually was a surprise of the paper, because prior to this, I was very negative on quantum theories. Stuart Hameroff, good friend, but I gave him hard times on Closer to Truth. And after going through, and not just Penrose Hameroff stuff, which I really worked hard to present, but 10 or 12 others that are from radically different perspectives, it gave me a sense that, maybe this is a legitimate way. And so, doing the paper moved me in that direction. And then I had a third, this is in the footnote. So if I have to go a second, it would be quite a third. I mean, this is all, completely seemingly incoherent in terms of the main one I had, and then the two second one. Then third was kind of an eliminative illusionism, kind of combined with a representational neurobiology. So you want it, there it is. But that's not the point. The point is to take the best creative thinking that human beings have ever done in every field and put it together. And that is the objective of the paper. And that's why, again, it's a paper to be published as a working paper, not as a book as my great theory for the world.
Mm. When I look at this list of all the names that you've added to this, and I think of all the people we've both had the privilege of interviewing, you've got people Papineau, Goldstein, Fagin, Tallis. There's so many names here. McFadden's one of those. You're talking about informational quantum. How did you pick and choose these people? Was Closer to Truth the source of? Because, okay, we've chatted before, maybe I should actually bring this person in, or was it just, okay, this is the most fascinating or most robust theory, and I believe this should be included? What is your criteria for this?
Well, let's unpack the question. A lot of things going on there. First of all, this was an organic process, and it's a process that it's sort of recursive. It's recursive. You just go around the circle over and over and over again, and see how you think about it. So obviously there was a core that, people from Closer to Truth, those are the people that I know, and Dave Chalmers, John Searle, Dan Dennett. I mean, those were the core, theological core, Richard Swinburne. There are different ways of thinking. Roger Penrose, Stuart Hameroff. So, I mean, they were the core ideas in Closer to Truth. I looked approximately of the 500 people that I've interviewed and discussed since 1999. Probably about a third have to do, or a little more than a third have to do. So close to 200 individuals who we talk brain, mind, personal identity, free will, all of the different activities. I make the point in Landscape that Landscape is totally focused on phenomenal consciousness, and it tries to avoid all other related areas which are relevant: perception, cognition, emotion, only if it deals directly with phenomenal consciousness, like emotion. Antonio Damasio, that's the main aspect that he uses as the foundation of consciousness. That's entirely legitimate, but other aspects of emotion are not. And so I try to keep it as tightly focused as possible on phenomenal consciousness. And so I had the core, and then I would, scan back issues of Journal of Consciousness Studies and other neurological journals, and just scan through 20 years worth. And whatever struck me as unusual or interesting that I didn't know, I would put in. And then just through conversations with different people who heard about it, I had a relationship. I mentioned it to Alex Gomez Marin. Obviously, had a major impact. He did that wonderful graphic that taking my linear list and making it into a color diagram, which lots of people identify with, which was great. And he had suggestions, people that I didn't know, and they were fortuitous things. I knew I wanted to deal with ESP and parapsychology, but I was fairly negative on it. Not negative, but I was ambivalent, but on the critical side. And then as I was doing this, a box of books arrived on my back doorstep from an individual at the Division of Perceptual Studies. I think it's DOPES at University of Virginia, which deal with near-death experiences and ESP in different ways. And the individual, a professor of cognitive science, a very sophisticated guy, Edward Kelly, um, those are books he had edited. And I scanned through it. It was really interesting. So I contacted Ed, and I had a very small section on dopes on their section. And working with him, I developed a whole new section. So it's all over the lot. And then when the paper came out, different people wrote in. So it was a very recursive process. And even right down to the last minute, which was in May. And again, credit to the progress in biophysics and molecular biology for letting me put in last minute pieces because they were missing. There was one Fingelkurtz had some very interesting ideas on I interviewed Nick Bostrom, who was an old friend, but on Closer to Truth, and on his new book, which was not relevant to this subject, but we talked a little bit about his approach to consciousness from a computational point of view, and I hadn't had that, so I put that in at the last minute. So again, it reflects the working paper nature of landscape, and that's good. So I felt bad like for Nick Bostrom came in at the last minute and it didn't have a full section because that would mess up the whole pagination and numbering. So I had to put it in a section that was already there as a separate paragraph, and I really felt bad about that because it should have be devoted as a full section. But I came to realize that that's okay because that's what this is supposed to be. It's a working paper, and in a different incarnation in the future, we'll make lots of corrections. I must say that of the 80 new theories that have come in, I really haven't found one that I said, oh, I really should have included that. There are, as I said, 2, 3, 4 that I think are worthy of inclusion. But I don't feel I, really had an error by not including those. So far, I'm feeling okay.
Robert, when was the publication date? Just remind me 1 second.
It was officially published online, I think June 30th or June 29th.
Yeah, so, yeah.
And it was published in print. In fact, I have a copy. Let's see where it is. So I hadn't planned this, but this is the August issue of the journal Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, and this is a print of it. And this whole thing is the paper, 142 pages. So this is a bit of a book, and it's and people can download the PDF of the actual journal online.
I'll put a link to that below. The reason why I asked when it was uploaded, Robert, was because I'm looking at this list and I'm thinking I spoke to about, let's say, 10 people that I see on this list right now since you've published that. And brought it up every now and then. With every guest, I said, okay, what did you think of the landscape? And quite a few of them, some of them felt it was amazing. Some felt you got them wrong. Some of them said you put them in 2 categories. So what's the feedback been from these guys to you?
Yeah, and that's been great. And I compiled a list of the actual feedback, and there were about 70 from people in the landscape. And it was, all extremely positive, And so I didn't want to associate. So what I did, the editors asked for feedback and I sent it to them. But then at the last minute, I thought it was not appropriate because I didn't have permission to use their names. So what I did was I put a list of all the comments, and they said about 70. And then I put a separate list of the names, but I didn't associate names with comments. But it's been extremely positive. Some have had differences. What I haven't mentioned, and this was important, with a number of the theories, people I knew personally from Closer to Truth, I sent it to them early on. and had them edited. And so how many, I haven't counted, but probably 30,
Mm.
a substantial number I sent. Um, the vast majority sent back with either no changes, which surprised me, or some minor edits. A few made changes, which were very good. And two or three made significant changes. And when I said, gee, I apologize, got it right, I said, no, you got it right, but that was how I thought 2 years ago. Here's my newer thinking. For those theories, I know that got it entirely right. Because it's authenticated. I wish I could have done that with all of them. Some are dead. That's a little more difficult uh,
Yes.
to get the actor.
Speaking about that, what do you think Dennett would have thought of this? Or did he know about this prior to his death?
He did not. My last interview with Dan was actually fairly recently. Um, I didn't send it to him, but I think I told him my last interview for his book, which is a wonderful book. I've been thinking, I commend that to everyone. Was I think in September of 2023. I think it was just in a period of time where the paper was in its second review. So I had some time, which I introduced Dan. Dan and I've had a great relationship over the years. I've respected him highly. I wrote it's on the Closer to website, a memorial to him when he died. And I ended it by saying something like, the way I can sum up Dan Dennett is, if I were God, Dan would be my prophet.
Dan, love that.
So Dan has always been very supportive. In fact, his last email to me after that interview was very complimentary in terms of my understanding of his work. That was not in reference to the landscape, but just reference the conversation we had on Closer to Truth. And he said, of all the interviews had over the years, I asked the best questions. So that was my last communication with Dan. When anybody on Closer to Truth dies, and unfortunately they do, I feel like it's like losing a family member. It's an odd thing. I first felt that way because I never thought that people would die. I mean, that just wasn't my thought. But you may know Abid Rundle, who is a scholar at Oxford, who wrote who was a very strong atheist and a very sophisticated guy, symbolic logic, and his book Why There Is Something Rather Than Nothing. And as you probably know, my other hot topic is why is there anything at all? And this is the book with John Leslie, The Mystery of Existence, Why Is There Anything at All? So the question of nothingness is a major, was my co-interest with consciousness over my lifetime. And Bede was one of the people I had interviewed on that, and he made an important contribution to the idea of why there is something rather than nothing, which was his point. But when he died, his son wrote to me and said that the Closer Truth interview, we had, 12 or so videos, was the best record of his intellectual output in existence.
That's beautiful.
And the family was extremely appreciative. And that affected me deeply. It affected me very deeply. I hadn't thought of that at all. But that has happened on a number of occasions. Marvin Minsky is another. Marvin was a great supporter of Closer to Truth. Even my belief in whether it's dualism or idealism or some theological theory is very different than his very strong atheism. But he was literally the very first high level supporter of Closer to Truth in 1999. And so his support actually gave it a lot of credibility in the early years when, might not have deserved the credibility, but he gave it to it very, very much so. And so when Marvin died, We did a special tribute to him on Closer to Truth, and his family, his son and two daughters, I think, just really appreciated what we did, and so that's been a benefit. Closer to Truth is sort of a memorialization of this, and what you're doing is it's the same.
Yeah, I find it very fascinating when this happens, when you see someone you've spoken to, gotten to know, maybe via email, in person, and then suddenly they're gone. It's quite amazing. I even remember Dan's emails as well. And sometimes when you read back, you just think like, wow, we've lost a powerful icon who really transcended this field for us. And
Yeah.
I, I remember, I think you almost named your channel MindQuest, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was the original name. As I said, the very first idea was When Truth May Change. But when I was ready to go on the air with it, it was Mind Quest, which was and it was not just mind body problem. It was sort of a quest for all areas of human knowledge where there may be this change. And I was with the manager, his name is Mel Rogers, who ran this small station at that point, small PBS station called KOCE in Orange County, California. Now it's PBS SoCal. And he was willing to take a chance on this crazy unknown guy with this idea. But he said he didn't like the title, Mind Quest, which was my title at the time. And he said, I just don't like that. He said, tell me what it's about, the show. And the subtitle is This is the Closest You'll Get to Truth. So the original title was Mind Quest. This is the closest you'll get to truth. So he said, what it's about? I said, well, it's about the subtitle. This is the closest you'll get to truth. It's a little bit of an aggressive statement, but it's not to be taken too seriously, but it's sort of a provocative statement that this is the closest you'll get to truth. And he said, that's your title, Closer to the Truth. And I said, no, it can't be it's not the truth. It's Closer to Truth. And he said, done. So the whole title, the sequence took about 20 seconds.
Mm. The reason why
And
the reason why I said that with Dan was, I mean, you almost called it MindQuest. I almost called this channel Quine and Qualia. I was so
That's
inspired,
good.
Dan. Yeah, I was a firm illusionist. Just came into this thing. That's what I wrote my dissertation on, and this channel's changed my views. So, one of the people on your list is Tallis, and when Raymond and I spoke, he told me something that really stuck with me. He said he's ontologically agnostic regarding these concepts now. The more you go into it, the more you start to realize you don't really know anything at all. So when people ask me, what's my true view on consciousness, I just say I'm ontologically agnostic. I don't know anymore. The more you express, I can critique, I can criticize, but I can empathize as well. And at this point, I'm not sure. And I think you find yourself in the same situation many times.
Ray Tallis is one of my intellectual heroes. There were a few people when I started Closer to the Truth I had as my idea, and I not necessarily mention everyone, but Ray was among them. Paul Davies, John Leslie, some others were my sort of I people that I really admired greatly, and took their ideas, and their ideas would help the foundation of Closer to Truth. I also, there's one footnote in Landscape which was very important to me. It's important to no one else, but I put it in there, and it's in the section with Evan Thompson. Evan is one of the really most creative people in the field and activism. The recent book with Adam Frank and Marcelo Gleiser in The Blind Spot, working with Varela and neurophenomenology. So Evan has been very much involved. Well, Evan's father is William Irwin. Evan's father is William Irwin Thompson, and William Irwin Thompson had books on passages about Earth and the end of history in the 1970s, which were greatly formative for me in changing my way of thinking. And so decades earlier, that was a foundational idea for Closer to Truth. And I insisted upon putting a footnote in there about Evan's father, which Evan appreciated. As I said, I don't know if anybody else will, but it was important for me to list all the people. And I have a very extensive acknowledgement. And I did that because it's true. that all of these people, and I'm sure I left out some, and I apologize, who have had some influence on me over the years in terms of ways of thinking, not necessarily specific ideas, but just ways of thinking. And to go back to what you said about Ray Tallis, he's at the top of the list. So yeah, the final section, the 10th of the landscape, there are these 10 categories, and 8 or so are real categories of different materialism, reductive physicalism, dualism, monisms, etc. The last two were not categories of consciousness on the ontology of consciousness, but rather things that I thought were critical to bring into the discussion. And one was this big category of anomalous, or which deal with parapsychology or different kinds of ideas, near-death experiences, which I had always been very negative on, in terms of critical thinking and other explanatory ideas, other ways to explain it. And issues of meditation and psychedelics, things that I dismissed as interesting in their own right, but not really relevant to the nature of consciousness. But I felt they needed to be covered, and I did, and I to some degree I had a modification. I have this line where Peter Stolges Hughes works with the psychedelics, and he believes it has some foundational ontology with consciousness. And I made a comment that his view, and also Sarah Lane Clark, I think her name is, I said they put a hairline fracture in my previous bone strength worldview, that psychedelics are interesting but irrelevant to the fundamental ontology of consciousness. I still believe it's not, but as I said, not totally sure. But the last section I call challenges, because those are people who challenge the whole idea. And Ray is prototypical of that section. Colin McGinn and others are in that section in terms of not just our inability, but the incapacity. Ray is, famously an agnostic and or an atheist, actually, and agnostic about the ontology of consciousness, and is, I can't imagine anybody more sophisticated in the world.
Ray actually sent me an email today. He's preparing a lecture for me. We haven't decided on the topic yet, but
good. He's terrific.
He's really great at challenging beliefs, and but that sentence, I mean, just being ontologically agnostic, I love it. It's my favorite.
Yeah.
My favorite statement for any time I want to get.
Good. Well, you've been converted.
Exactly. When you look at this list, there are heroes, icons, legends. How did it feel for you as someone recording Closer to Truth? Because you started this so many years ago. Has it been a true privilege and honor? Because, I mean, look at the people on this list. Look at the people you've spoken to. It must have been so incredible, man.
Absolutely. When I think about it, it's been a privilege and an honor. But in the process of doing it, it's never meaningful. The only thing meaningful is the ideas that you're dealing with at the moment, preparing it, reading their books. I'm in the position as you are, where I've read their books in the last week. They haven't read their books in 10 years. So I know more than they do about the order of things and how it goes. And, and so now, today we're reversing roles, because a lot of things I wrote in landscape, I have escaped me. I mean, I couldn't give an exact description of a lot of the theories without rereading it. But that has been the privilege, as I'm sure you know, as you've done Mind Body Solution, that you in be able to really understand and appreciate the diversity of thinking, and in a very both rich, comprehensive, and subtle ways.
And in this journey, you've become one of these legends, at least from my perspective.
Well, not from my family's perspective, but that's okay.
Robert, have you thought about, has anyone ever told you that, okay, you set out these categories, you've got materialism, but within materialism, you've got about 10 different subcategories.
Sure,
Does that
sure.
make Robert a materialist?
Oh, I think I deal with that question because it's a good question, and the answer is a little complex because if you want to be very simple, you can split the theories into two categories. One are pure materialism theories and ones that are not. And so category one of the material theory and the second are not. Now, even in the not, there's a problem. Like Galen Strawson famously says that a real materialist is a panpsychist. That's a real material. So that he's totally materialist, and a lot of monists, and the quantum theories. Quantum is sort of physical. So materialism here is sort of the standard way of thinking about materialism or physicalism. And just to be simple, it's not simple, but just to be simple, you have these two categories of ways of thinking: material there and non-material. Now, if it's non-material, you really can't make much progress using science by definition. It's a trivial statement I'm making a sophisticated, it's a trivial statement. Because material means subject to the rules and regulations of the scientific method to discern truth. And if it's not material, it's not subject to that. It may help your way of thinking. It may be helpful. You might be able to get some data, but you cannot rely on it. So very simple, that distinction. So for all your non-materialist theories, a scientific approach is not going to work. It's not effective, and therefore you almost have a full stop. You can't take it much further other than the specific nature of the non-material theory. On the other hand, if you have a materialist point of view, you can use the scientific method, and therefore it opens up a vast panoply of different ideas. So that's why there are so many more specific theories under materialism than there are under the others. So it's not that I'm a materialist. It is I'm trying to use my analytical ways of thinking to understand the different fields. And so when you're non-materialist, you can't make much more progress than saying, it's a panpsychic, it's pan-protopsychism or cosmopsychism or micropsychism, whatever. You're not going to go much further. With dualism, you can have emergent dualism, interactive dualism, but you're not going to get much further than that. Under materialist theories, you can take it very much further in all different fashions. And so that's the reason why it is the case. I'm reminded of a wonderful statement from Anil Seth and Tim Bain when they did a very good survey of neurobiological theories. And they said something like, the more we learn in science, we usually have fewer and fewer explanations because we rule things out. He says what's happening in consciousness is the more data that we have more proliferation of theories.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a very telling comment about the nature of consciousness. I begin landscape with one idea, which to me was a driving necessity, and that is that when you look at the different theories, and just even cursorily, you have a vast difference in order of magnitude of where the fundamental node or nexus of the consciousness is. A vast difference in order of magnitude, as well as realms of reality. And so you go from, quantum subatomic level activity in the, microtubules, if you want, and then you go orders of magnitude in different ways to the electromagnetic theories of the brain. I mean, these are just in the material a world that's, vast orders of magnitude difference in terms of how it works, with, neurobiological being something in the middle. And then you have these vast differences in realms of existence once you get beyond the materialism categories. And so these 2 points, the vast differences in orders of magnitude and realms of existence, and the proliferation of theories, are the 2, shall we say, socio-scientific analysis of the whole field. And to me, that is an important fact. Both facts; those are important things to recognize, and that's what one of the objectives of Landscape, to make that clear. Which is why I insisted that if it was going to be published, it had to have the philosophical and theological theories for me to be able to publish it. I could not publish it without that.
And already making a taxonomy of explanations is hard enough. You went further. You went into the implications of these theories as well. What for anyone who hasn't read your paper, can you tell us more about these implications and how theories of consciousness do lay out certain implications when it comes to reality, meaning, and the way we live our lives?
Sure, and that was equally important to me, because I've dealt with in the past questions, for example, a virtual immortality. I did a paper maybe when was it 7-8 years ago on that topic, which was sort of a quasi beginning to think about the taxonomy of consciousness, because in dealing with that topic, I had to deal with theories of consciousness in a very rudimentary way at the time. And so there are really, as we've talked so far, Landscape has its primary objective is to gather the main theories, all of them as much as we can, and to build a taxonomy. That's what I'd call phase 1, or the first part. And that's the main part. That's what I wanted to accomplish really well. Then there are 2 other things that come that follow from that. The first I was able to include, and that is the implications of it for, I took 4 areas. One is meaning, purpose, value, if any, in life. Second was AI consciousness, which is obviously the hot social topic at the moment. Not that that's very meaningful, but at the moment that is. The third was virtual immortality. And the fourth was life after death. I could have added a fifth, which is legitimate, which is free will. But by that time I was exhausted, so I couldn't do that. But free will legitimately should be an implication of a theory of consciousness. So I deal with some free will in Landscape, in that those free will, like Sapolsky and Mitchell, have different views of free will. They reflect on the nature of consciousness. So I didn't discuss free will qua free will, but free will as it reciprocally affects the nature of consciousness. But it should be the main way should be the other direction, how the different theories of consciousness affect free will. I didn't, as I said, it was just beyond me to do that at that point. But so that's a second area. A third area that is not nowhere so far, but I do want to do in the future, is to take each theory of consciousness and subject it to a kind of systematic analysis that would not be just critiquing each one, but rather come up with a structure that can be applied to everyone. And I'd have 4 categories I would want to analyze each theory in, and do it in not in a conversation. I might do it in a conversation on Close to the Truth, as you do wonderfully on Mind Body Solution, but do it in a very rigorous fashion in a similar kind of paper or some other form that we're thinking about. The questions are very simply: what are the foundational assumptions underlying the theory? And this would be done for each one independently, not on a comparative basis, but each one answering these fundamental questions. 1, what are the foundational assumptions underlying the theory? 2, what are the key properties or ideas of the theory that distinguish the theory from other theories? And what are the similarities between that theory and other theories? And this is done for each one on an independent basis. Third question are, what are the primary open issues for the theory, the challenges to the theory, without adjudicating it, but just say what the challenges are, what the open issues are. And the fourth area of the structure would be what kind of progress can be made, or what kind of next steps are there to be taken in understanding it. So I'd like to be able to do that for each of the theories at some point, engaging the individuals who, those who are alive, those who are not alive. I would look for the leading experts on their theories, and there are very people who obviously study, whether it's Carl Jung or David Bohm or different historical figures to be expert on their work. So in the paper, I did make a first effort at dealing with the implications from my own perspective. And this is a very different section. It's the last part of landscape, and it's sort of an independent section. And these give my own perspectives. And it's very different because now I'm really giving my view, as opposed to the core of landscape, which, three-quarters of the paper, which is it totally independent of my view, but trying to present each of the views as the authors would present it themselves, but do it because I was doing it as a third person, writing in a way where it can be easily understood by a sophisticated scientist or philosopher, not an expert in the field, but someone who has good thinking that can really encapsulate their views. So I worked very hard to do that in the first part, totally independent of my view. As we both said, each theory is done as though when I did it, that was the only important thing in the world, and my life was going to depend on whether I did that well or not. Then it was gone and on to the next. The last part on implications was really my own ideas. I do have some other people giving their opinion. I quote them as well. And this is not designed to help people. I mean, people say, this has helped me a lot, and I wish I could take credit for it, but I really can't. This is done really for my own deep understanding and trying to explore my own thinking. And I've always felt in everything I've done that unless I can write it independently, that another person can read and understand it, I don't understand it. So I'm a great believer in the written word and being able to articulate it on paper, so that somebody independent can read it, or I can read it. If it doesn't make sense there, it means, because I think I can present ideas pretty decently, but if I can't, that means I don't understand it. So I blame myself in not understanding the theory if it doesn't make sense. And so that's what I tried to do in the second part on these four areas: meaning, purpose, value, AI consciousness, virtual immortality, and life after death. And so what I do is take each of the theories under those four sections and say what would be the implications of it. And in some cases, it's obvious, and in some cases, it's uncertain. And I try to, and this is, I did it several times, but there's no claim that that's a perfection or the total answer to it. I've been a major skeptic of virtual immortality, from that first paper I did 8 or 10 years ago. And people were angry that I was such a skeptic. I'm still a skeptic, and maybe slightly less, but not much less. AI consciousness is very similar, and AI consciousness is hot in the news today. And when I'm asked about it, the first thing I say is that it depends on your theory of consciousness. Nobody's saying that today. I mean, I don't hear a lot of that conversation, but it really does. And there are, for example, many materialists who disagree with that AI cannot be conscious. And I think that's incoherent. I think that if you are a real physicalist materialist, at some point, in principle, AI will be conscious. Um, and that reflects down. Others, if you're a very strict dualist, the only way you can get AI consciousness is through what's called emergent dualism, where there are some hidden psychophysical laws of the universe that once you get a certain kind of structure together, out pops a non-physical something, non-physical substance or whatever. That is a coherent position, but that's a very small part of dualism. Most dualists are not emergent dualists. They are, you know, consciousness is fundamental in the universe, or God created individual souls or whatever. And so those are largely incompatible with AI consciousness. Something like idealism, where everything is conscious, that requires a more careful unpacking about, is AI conscious under an idealist situation. So another thing I point out is that I list these four categories. They're very different kinds of categories in terms of ways of thinking. They don't have the same structural element. They all sound interesting, but they have very different structural components to it. So, for example, between AI consciousness and virtual immortality, I make this strong point is that AI consciousness is a necessary but not sufficient step to have virtual immortality. So if you do have AI, if you don't have AI consciousness because of your theory of consciousness, virtual immortality is an absolute impossibility. If you do have AI consciousness in principle, then virtual immortality is possible, but not at all necessary. Many other steps that you have to take, which seemingly are intractable under any conceivable technology for a very long period of time, but not in principle impossible. Not. It is possible in principle if you can have AI consciousness under your theory of consciousness. Virtual immortality is not impossible in principle, but in practice, I don't see the runway to get there for a very long period of time. And so that's the kind of thinking that one does. And in some areas, there's a lot of uncertainty, like with integrated information theory, which I point out in the paper is I have its own category, and I compare it to global workspace theory, which doesn't have its own category because it's under neurobiological. So it's a global workspace is a third level. It's under materialism, under neurobiological, so it's a third level, whereas integrated information theory is a first level. So that looks like I favor information IIT, which I don't. The reason is it's a classification approach. That global workspace has to do with the flow of circuitry in the brain. It's neurobiologically based, and that's where it belongs. IIT is uncertain because of its ontological foundations. It's not a panpsychist thing. I mean, they go to great lengths to explain why they're not panpsychists, although they're accused of being panpsychists. It's sort of a qualia space. It's a quasi-Hilbert space for consciousness in some realm. A lot of kind of uncertainty. Uncertainty is fine. But it's a classification approach that cannot be easily classified under the others. It would be an insult, intellectual insult to classify it under any of the other categories. And so therefore, I had no choice. Same with non-reductive physicalism. And so the element of analysis is designed to treat the theory as it is from an analytical point of view. It's not having a hierarchy of which is more important. I make a point that even the length of discussion of each theory shouldn't be judged on that shouldn't represent its merit. In other words, the longer ones are the truer ones, and the shorter ones are Well, I said sometimes the long ones just take longer to explain because they're just too complicated, and the short ones are very simple. They may be the truth. So I try to, you know, kind of avoid that any of these sort of meta conclusions, which I don't have. Uh, so the implications is sort of to throw out there. These are big questions in terms of understanding what we are as human beings. AI consciousness, of course, has its practicality now in terms of moral rights and various other kinds of issues that we want to think about. So I want to have those out there as things to discuss in the global marketplace of important ideas. My fundamental point, though, is the only thing I'm really sure about. All that section of meaning, value, purpose, AI consciousness, virtual immortality, life after death, plus free will, all of those things, I'm only sure of one thing, and that is that the theory of consciousness counts.
Mm. Yeah, it's fundamental. It becomes the first thing we need to explain. Robert, when I look, do you want to, sorry, do you want to add to that?
No, no, I totally agree. And it's not generally done that way.
Mm.
Questions just look like it can be answered on its surface, and they cannot.
Mm. When I look at your career, I see you as being the first bridge between all these different thinkers. You were the link that brought reductive physicalists together with quantum physicists, panpsychists, dualists, monists, and was that hard for you to then share your own opinion on consciousness, on life, consciousness, meaning, cosmos? Did it become difficult over time to share your own views because you were this bridge between all these different thinkers?
Yeah, for sure. I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to do it not because I'm embarrassed at what I think or that I don't have confidence in what I think. It's for two reasons. One, I didn't want to influence the apparent influence on the paper because it wasn't the case. I mean, each theory I tried my very best to present it as the person him or herself would present it. And I also felt that, my opinion really doesn't matter because what matters is to see the vast contribution of the totality of humanity
Mm.
as a group. And I really believe that's an important thing to recognize. One thing I've not mentioned, which is important to me, which is again something I didn't realize, beginning about, I don't know, probably with the pandemic in 2020, because at that point, the YouTube, in particular, and the website of Closer to Truth had a very huge explosion in terms of numbers of people watching us. Nobody had anything else to do. And you were thinking about bigger ideas. The pandemic got us thinking. So we had a lot of feedback. And what I began to see is we got comments, from every country, every nationality, every religion, every race. And the similarity between these people from Iran and Suriname, and Nigeria and South Africa and Russia and Ukraine were all the same. I mean, you couldn't tell. Nobody had any nationality. Nobody had any religion. Everybody was just totally focused on the nature of the questions in consciousness, or why is there something rather than nothing, the fundamental questions of closer to truth. And to me, that was revelatory because the situation between the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, have been very difficult for people to deal with in terms of where humanity is. And it was, at the end of 2023, after the Hamas terrorist attack and the terrible things going on, it was a discouraging time. But when I saw all these different people from different religions and regions, not even dealing with these external things we read about in the newspaper every day, but just focus on these individual questions, I realized that the nature of these big questions that we're dealing with, um, are universal questions and they unify humanity.
Yeah.
And nobody cares about the politics or the any of the externalities, but are focused. And this may be a small subset of humanity. Not saying it's a large group, but that to me was that was greatly encouraging.
That's our
That
sense of humanity.
Yeah, I mean that is the thing. I mean, and the third biggest market we have is India, which has a history of sophisticated approaches to big questions like consciousness and fundamental reality. You might agree or disagree with what they say, but it's fundamental to the tradition as opposed to peripheral to the tradition. And getting just wonderfully sophisticated ideas from people of all different backgrounds, and so that's sort of the kind of a sociological um, uh, result of what Closer to Truth has been in particular. Landscape as well, but mostly Closer to Truth, and that to me is very gratifying, and gives me some hope. And time looks like it needs that hope.
Yeah. When you look at Closer to Truth, it used to be cosmos consciousness meaning, and now you've added a new layer there. It's cosmos life consciousness.
Yes, yes.
Do you want to go into that and explore this new branch that your show is going on?
Yeah, it's a very exciting one for us, and it's basically philosophy of biology. So we were given a very significant grant several years ago. In fact, the grant was officially done 2 days before the lockdown on COVID it occurred in China, in Wuhan. And so we got the grant, and then there was this 2 year absence, and we couldn't do anything, 2.5 years, which we needed to get extensions, and it got complicated. But it was a wonderful opportunity to deal with a really very different approach than anything we had done before, and it really fit a hole in Closer to Truth. Even though my PhD is in a biological science, I never dealt with evolution as a fundamental question, because I was very familiar with the evolution religion debate, divide, and I didn't think I could contribute to it, and I didn't think that there was sufficient substance there to deal with it. I just really avoided it and had very little to do with anything in biology itself. But then I began to realize that this is a hole in what we're doing. Um, and by the way, some people wanted to say cosmos consciousness life, that consciousness came before life, which would be a philosophical statement of its own, which I
I was
did not want.
I swear I was going to ask you about that because my show is Mind Body Solutions. So automatically I'm saying there's a dichotomy here. So there's definitely something there. So if you do this, are you then saying cosmos, life, consciousness, meaning? Is there any emergence happening here? Because are you?
Yeah, I mean,
There's always a
yeah,
bit.
and again, I wouldn't read too much in. I would put life before consciousness, because that's the normal understanding of it. If you put consciousness before, then that's fundamental. Then you put consciousness before cosmos. If you go that far, you'd have to do that. Um,
Change the whole show.
yeah. So, and so but philosophy of biology really is a very fascinating area, and is a very helpful approach to think. It's a very helpful way of thinking, and we put out we have 250 videos with we were very lucky in terms of scheduling because people were able to come, that we have arguably most 75-80% of the found from Australia, Peter Godfrey Smith and Paul Griffiths, happened to be in the U.S. At a conference during a time that we could have filmed. So we changed our schedule and had people in the U.S. come when they were available in the U.S. So we were very lucky. And in the UK with the Richard Dawkins, Dennis Noble, and Samir Okasha, and John Dufresne, we really had great Michael Roos, Elliot Sober, Alex Rosenberg. I mean, these are some of the leading thinkers in the field. And we approach questions of biology from a philosophical standpoint, asking how philosophical thinking can help puzzles in biology, and then can biology help puzzles in philosophy, which is sort of a secondary point. And we explore not just the classic philosophy of biology, which is evolution based, but applying philosophical thinking to broader areas like the nature of cognition and emotion, like religion, both directions. How does religion articulate with evolution? Is it contradictory to certain religion views and others? What does evolution say about the origin of religion? Those kinds of questions. And then even broader afield in terms of alien life, different kinds of intelligences, transhumanism, but bringing a philosophical way of thinking to those questions of biological thinking. And so we have 250 videos now on Closer Truth website, and many of them are on Closer Truth YouTube. We have 5 television shows which have been broadcast that are on the website, and we have 8 more in production right now we're working on. So that'll be released by the end of the year. So it'll be 13 altogether. And I didn't mention, but there's a vast difference on Closer Truth. That's 2 major products. One are raw videos, which are anywhere from 7 minutes to 15 minutes. Each one on a very isolated topic within a bigger topic. And so with individuals, we might do 8, 10, 12, 15 or more in each session, which would be a half day on each of those topics. And those are only edited rawly to take out, if somebody sneezed or the equipment went bad. And it was very raw. And so if I made a mistake, we leave it in there. It's all very natural. But the television shows are highly scripted, take a year to do, very thoughtfully done. Peter Gesell, as I mentioned earlier, is the producer, director, and co-creator. I work together on those in terms of the visuals, in terms of the writing of the script to tell a story. It's sometimes a little artificial in terms of going from one person to another, because that's not the way it was literally done. People think I'm fly to Oxford and then fly to Chicago or whatever each week. Of course, that's not the way it happens. When we shoot like we did in the UK last year, we were there for shot for a week and did all of these, and then do the post productions over the next year or more, and then weave together a story that I want to tell. It's a story of how to understand this question and different points of view, sometimes similar views, but different perspectives. And in each case, I explain why it's important and then come to a summary. And, a lot of people have complained, in a sense, that I don't give the answer at the end. And it's not because I'm hiding it. It's because I don't know it. As you said, ontologically agnostic. And that applies to a lot of the topics. But when people ask me or criticize that, does that bother you that you don't have the answer? You're no closer to truth than when you started. And I said, yeah. He said, but I have this phrase is I luxuriate in the questions. I now have embraced. I mean, to me, the nature of the questions are so much richer and so much more imbued with complexity, and it to me is very satisfying to understand the questions at the depth they do. With these big ideas like why is there something rather than nothing, or the nature of consciousness, that there's no firm answer that I feel confident with. But I really feel I understand those questions very, very deeply. And that, to me, at this point, at least, is very satisfying.
I understand what you're talking about with people asking about you're not yet closer to the truth. The other day I tweeted, I'm so obsessed with the mind body problem that it's starting to literally give me mind body problems. And then someone
Yeah.
commented to say, oh, why would that be the case when you already have the mind body solution? And then I was like, okay,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Right. Well, that's good. That's good. I totally subscribe to that, and that's we've done similar. I mean, it's uh, mind body problem, question mark. It's just dealing with the issue and finding all the aspects to it, and it's a very enriching way to appreciate what it means to be, exist and sentient.
Mm. Well, I can't wait for this new series of life and the philosophy of life from your channel. Robert, is there anything about um, Closer to Truth or the landscape that you'd like to mention that you haven't covered that you think people should know?
Look, I just think it's a great privilege that I've had and our whole team has had to be able to present these ideas over the years. I'm greatly in debt to all the people who have supported us in by participating. And in the early days, I mentioned Marvin Minsky as one example, who had no right to give me any credibility at the time, but did and has supported it over the years. So everybody, I felt feel very in debt to all the people who have participated and have given of themselves, of their ideas richly. And so I really look upon it as a privilege help um, to help humanity understand itself, and as a vehicle to allow all these people their ideas. And I would like to see, as I've said, it was not the original idea, but it is now, to see the impact of these big questions on a broad sector of humanity. And to the degree that more and more people can get engaged with this, is the degree to which I would have more and more hope for humanity. I will tell you one of my favorite stories of Closer to Truth, and it was in the early days. Got a letter from a woman who lived in Bakersfield, California, not the most intellectual site in the world, but she said, Closer to Truth has been, a godsend to me, and the reason is I have a wonderful husband and I have five terrific sons, and one is a mechanic and one is a factory worker, and they all think I'm crazy because I am interested in these big questions. My husband and my five sons think I'm nuts. But what happened is my first grandson is now 14 years old, and he loves these big questions. And he and I together watch Closer to Truth. and and to me, that was a wonderful comment, because people ask me, and as you can imagine, because we're big media, we have big budgets and have gotten big grants. People ask you for demographics and all these complicated things. I would never be able to surface this woman on a demographic ever. It'd be impossible. And so what it is that there's this internal twitch in some people that they have this compulsion about these kinds of questions, and you cannot discern that from any externality, not their degrees, not their religion, not their race, not their country of origin or anything. It's just there, and it pops out. And many of those people think that they're strange because they don't know anybody else like that. So Closer has been a way to be kind of encouraging. There are others of your kind that are similar, and the more we can proliferate, the better humanity will be.
That's exactly how I felt growing up. No one in my household or even within my entire area watched this type of show, and this was one of those things that I grew up watching, and it made me feel like I had a community that I could grow up with, and I have, and it's all thanks to you. So it's played a huge
Well,
role in my life.
it's a great honor to having um, progeny.
Thank you so much. Well, it's that to me is an honor. Just even chatting to you today, it feels like chatting to a hero. It's pretty epic. And by the way, Robert, when you go online and you go on YouTube, you mentioned earlier the way it exploded around 2021. Every time, if you type consciousness, meaning, life, whatever, there's dozens of Closer to Truth episodes that pop up. Your channel literally just it explodes all over the place. Everybody has to be watching this because it's the number one recommended video to watch whenever you type these terms. So you've dominated this niche at this point, and I think you've given more credibility to a lot of scientists and philosophers indirectly, even though you feel like they've given you credibility by being on the show. So kudos to you for that.
Yeah, well, as I said, thank you. I don't deserve it in terms of some morality. I mean, it's just been a personal passion. I think the phrase I use something is that, why do you do Closer to Truth on an interview? And one of my answers is I cannot not do it.
Yeah. Another feeling. I mean, I earn nothing from making Mind Body Solution. I just love it too much.
Mhm.
It's
Well, it's great.
thank you so much. That means the world to me. Robert, any final words? Anything from your side that you'd like to end with?
Look, I appreciate what you're doing, and let's keep doing it and see where the world goes. Every day is a challenge, and very much appreciate all the viewers of Closer to Truth, participants, and also for landscape. I do want to take it further in the future. We have some ideas of expanding it, perhaps with a website, interactive. I want more of the authors to authenticate, because I didn't know, the only ones I went to were the ones I knew personally, because I actually didn't know whether it was going to be published, because it had all these other theories and philosophy and theology until late. I wasn't that sure, or where or when. But we want to expand. We want to give more people a chance to authenticate their own work. We want to expand it a little bit, and a lot of suggestions coming in. So looking forward to continuing both with Closer to Truth and with Landscape and with Mind Body Solution.
Well, if there's any way Mind Body Solution or myself can be a part of your journey, just shout out. I'll be there anytime, anywhere.
Great. Well, we have collective work to do, and let's get to it.
Yes, it's been such an honor to chat to you, man. Thank you.
Great. Well, appreciate what you've done. I mean, it's honestly your feelings are very important to me, because, as you know, this whole process is a very lonely one. I mean, it's very isolated. Doing this work over these 25 years, it's been very, very hard. It's all nights, many nights. I just did 2 scripts on philosophy of biology, literally all night, because I had, family obligations during the day, and to know that this has had an impact on you, like this woman from Bakersfield, is a very personally enriching. It's my honest, it's shocking. I mean, I don't think anybody cares what I do, but I find a lot of people do.
Yeah, I mean, you have no idea how much the show. When I was a kid, I watched it, and I even became a television presenter in South Africa because of this show. My goal was to go from there and hopefully one day host a show like yours. It never came to fruition, unfortunately, but I eventually decided Mind Body Solution would be a close second.
No, it's great. Now in today's world, that's even more important.
Yeah, so it's directly impacted me in various ways, and I appreciate you for even exposing me to so many concepts I would have never been exposed to. So it literally changed my life.
Yeah, good. Well, look, that's very gratifying to me, and I'll just keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.